Want to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. And I am done. Okay, so I just got done reading The Will of the Many by James Islington, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing this book, which was just right now. So this book is amazing. This is a super easy 5 out of 5, and one of the best books that I read this year. And I think, just off the top of my head, I think it's the best book that I've read this year that was published in 2023. It's just incredible. I feel like I'm the last person to read this thing on BookTube. Everyone's been talking about this, and I put it off for way, way too long because my previous experience with James Islington did not go great. I read the first book in the 𝐒𝐻𝐽𝐺 trilogy. I don't remember the name of the first book, but I was not wowed by it. I felt like it was a little bit of a chore to get through. I didn't hate it. Certainly didn't love it and didn't like it enough to continue on with the series, even though everybody tells me that the ending is just simply incredible. But I don't want to push through reading, 3 full-length books for something that I'm not really enjoying just to get to an ending. And it had so many core problems with it, namely the mechanics of the book, and they did this kind of time-traveling thing that I was not a fan of. But so many problems that I'm like, yeah, James Islington just isn't for me. But everyone kept talking about this thing. And eventually, I put it up as a vote on my Patreon. I put 5 books out there, and this one overwhelmingly won. And not only that, I then put it up a vote on my Discord to see if it should be one of the book that we do a buddy read on, like a group read where we talk about it as we read it, and it also overwhelmingly won. So I had some optimism going into it, but this is so much better than I ever would have dreamed it being. This is simply incredible. Everything about it was amazing. The criticisms I have are so small that they're almost worth not even mentioning. I will mention it a little bit as I do a little bit. I think I'll probably do a little bit of a spoiler chat at the end of this to talk in a little bit more depth on this. But yeah, you should be reading this. I mean, it is what you want out of a single POV, first person perspective that keeps the action going, which is hard sometimes in first person perspective. Still with that kind of epic scope that I certainly want out of a large scale fantasy story. That promising setup to the story where these great things have already happened and even greater things are going to happen fills you full of that sense of wonder. I thoroughly loved that this book used like this ancient. Is it ancient? This classic Roman theme to the book, which I've never read anything like that before. And I'm a big fan of Roman history. And so to get that blended with my favorite genre of book in the fantasy format was just a joy to be able to read. I think that the writing quality in this was so far superior to the first story. I thought the way this story was constructed to keep the reader engaged was so much superior. The characters were wonderful. I just can't say enough positive things about this. You need to be going out and reading this thing unless you hate Roman history, I guess. And not even just that. I feel like you could hate Roman history and still like this. But if you thoroughly see anything Roman inspired and just hate it, and if you hate first person perspective, and I know first person's not for everybody, I don't try to judge. I like a lot of stories that are. I like a lot of stories that aren't. It's a matter of how it's executed. But I will say that it's harder to write first person in an interesting way because you have to rely on this one character so much. And if you don't love that character, you're not going to love the book. In a multi-POV, you can not like some characters and you can still really get a lot of enjoyment out of it. But yeah, this one just went for it all and it knocked it out of the park. So let's talk a little bit about the different facets of this story and what I thought about them. So let's start talking about the story itself, the tale that's being told. This is non-spoiler as possible. You've got this character with a mysterious past. His past is known to him, but he's not telling the reader. Now, this is an odd choice because since it's in first-person perspective, you know you're in the character's head. You know the character already knows the things that are being hidden from you about his past. And I had struggles with that. I don't love often when stories hide key information from the reader unless it's imperative to the story. And it can often be hidden for far too long. And it can be kind of groan-worthy. Now, I've been told by people on the Discord that I think it made a lot of sense that the character never really thought about it because the character already knew it. You're going through their thoughts. How often do you think about the details of of what you were when you were younger? You already know them. Why do you go over them? You think about things in the current and the future, and you're going forward on that. So that part made sense to me. But then eventually you do get reveals about that past, and they're not this wow moment of just shocking you with it. It's more just, hey, now you get to be filled in. And it did work. And I feel like the story was better for it. But you've got this character with a mysterious past and this ancient kind of Roman background of a story. And he finds it in, I'll talk more about the magic system in a moment, at least what I understand of it. But he finds himself suddenly adopted by a very powerful person who then sets him forward on a mission in return for adopting this character and making him part of his very powerful family. And that's the setup for the story. I can't say too much more there, but there's a lot of intrigue. And I love political intrigue in my stories, but it's very much not straightforward. You have this character being pulled in many different directions, him trying to find the right way, trying to navigate things while still keeping his head on his shoulders. And yeah, very, very engaging story that holds, it's rare for me to fly through a book that I love. Normally when I love a book, I want to slow down. But on this one, partially because I did it on a buddy read and I was limiting myself to about 50 pages a day. But when I got done with those 50 pages, I was just itching to read more. It was so hard not to keep going forward on this. But I stayed true and I stuck to the schedule. But man, that was hard. And in a lot of books, especially books that I don't like, that would be very easy for me to do. To say, yeah, I'm not going to keep going. Or on a lot of books that I love, I'll be like, yeah, I love it. I don't want to burn out on it. But this one, it hooks you. Now, it does have some cliffhangery moments on the chapters, but that's fine. It's single POV. The next chapter, you're just going to be dealing with them, so that's totally fine too. So that's the story in a nutshell. Let's talk about the world building a little bit. I found the world to be well realized, but nothing that wowed me. You can just think of ancient Rome and the world here. Now, the locations are different. The map is different. But you don't really need to be looking at a map to understand the story. It all makes sense. Everything happens in a relatively small set of locations. Nothing complex here. It's just ancient Rome and fantasy story. So yeah, you can't give it the highest of marks on the world building because it wasn't very inventive, but it was enjoyable. And ultimately, that's all I really care about in my stories, is make me have a good time. The magic here. So the magic I found to be interesting. Now, I didn't love it. Now, I suspect a lot of people are going to just thoroughly love it. Now, I don't want to talk too much about it because I find that it's going to be interesting for you to read about it and understand it as it gets in more depth. But essentially, on a very bare bones level, you have these different levels of important people that have a lot of people under a pyramid underneath them that are seeding their will. That's where the name will comes from in the story. But think of like a part of their soul to this person to make them more powerful and give them more powerful traits to the magic that they can pull off. Now, the magic is not like intense. It's pretty muted. It very infrequently does that sort of thing get pulled out of this story. Because, quite frankly, for a lot of the story, the character and the characters around this main character are literally not allowed to use this special skill that a lot of these people have. So, yeah, very small magic in the background, but it does add a lot of flavor to the story, which ultimately makes it more interesting. Let's talk about the characters. The characters rock. I mean, this is a character-first story. First-person perspectives kind of have to be. And it nails it. I mean, this main character is highly compelling. I love this character. They are a little bit of a, what's the term for a character that is super like, they can't do wrong. They're like a perfect character. I think it's a Mary Sue. Is that the name of it? Or a Harry Stew for a male character? Is that what it is? Let me know in the comments. But this character is a bit of that. But that's okay. Because there are a lot of other characters here that are not that way. And the character doesn't do everything perfectly. But it's definitely, more in that than it's not. But the friends that this character makes are very memorable. I won't forget them anytime soon. I'm not going to have a very hard time picking up the next book and remembering who they are, what makes them important, what I loved about them, and the relationship they have to this main character, and the relationships that change over time, and the relationships that by the end of the story, I found out that I didn't really understand because it's in first person, and you don't know what that other person's thoughts are. And their thoughts were not the same as what you assumed as the reader, and I won't say any more than that, but definitely some things throw you for a loop, which is great. What else? The prose. The prose is great. Not the most, flowery prose that you're ever going to get here. You're not going to just soak up the sentences here. But it's very serviceable and didn't take away anything from the story, but didn't really add a lot to the story as well. Just kind of there. But I'd say adequate from the prose. But again, for me as a reader, I don't need wonderful prose for me to enjoy a wonderful story. And ultimately, this was a wonderful story. So, overall, this is amazing. I don't know where it's going to fall in my favorite books of the year. Like in the 110 or so books that I read, I'll be going through that ranking and kind of deciding it as I go along. But, off the top of my head, top 10. Certainly, I think it's the best book that I read that was published this year. I'm going to have to look at my list. But it feels that way off the top of my head. But yeah, great stuff. Check this thing out. It's worth your time. Get into this series because it's probably going to turn into a really, really big thing. I mean, when I did a series recently on my channel where I invited like 70 plus fantasy booktubers to tell me what their favorite book that was published in 2023. The #1 winner was The Will of the Many. And this isn't because it was a down year. I mean, Brandon Sanderson came out with 4 books this year, and The Will of the Many still got first place. And Brandon Sanderson is by far the most popular fantasy writer out there right now, certainly in the booktubing community, but elsewhere as well, I imagine. So yeah, this thing's amazing. Check it out. Don't put it off any longer. You'll thank me later. So that's it for me. Thank you so much, and happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝐿𝐼𝐴, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tay C, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Fanixan, Harry B, Joe, Cat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Philippe, Sky, TW57, Wacky, and Zion. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.